Our book is a history of the emergency, a 2-year period in the mid-70s when India was under dictatorship. So elections were indefinitely postponed. Fundamental rights were suspended. Some 110,000 people were sent to prison. Trade unions, the judiciary, and the press were threatened into submission. A couple of thousand were even killed for resisting the regime. So for all that, some 2 years into it, Indira Gandhi decided to revoke the emergency. So elections were held and the Congress was defeated. Democracy returned, as it were. So in our book, Christophe and I present a narrative history of the emergency, while also pausing to register that it was a populist, corporatist, and sultanist regime. Then we go on to look at the factors enabling the dictatorship. So we foreground the undermining of India's public institutions and disaffection in the countryside. Our main argument is that the emergency, in fact, was not the aberration in Indian history that it is often made out. But then again, nor was it really a turning point. So we don't think that there was some kind of Nehruvian golden age of toleration and liberalism that was followed by authoritarianism and arbitrariness under Indira Gandhi. So what we argue is that the emergency was a concentrate of a singularly Indian style of rule, alive in Modi's India as it was in Nehru's India. So now, of course, Indira Gandhi's dictatorship was bookended by long periods of democratic rule on either side of it. But as we show in our book, it's the continuities and not the dissimilarities between the three periods that stand out. So in a sense, by pointing to the defects in Indian democracy, we make the case for defending Indian democracy. That is, defending the separation of powers, defending free speech, defending mass movements and civil society.
The populists indeed have this tendency to desinstitutionalize the party politics in the first place, and the politics of the country at large. So the book is on the way the emergency is partly a sequel of this process. So you begin with populism and you end with authoritarianism. And this trajectory is a trajectory India is somewhat repeating. It's not India only. In every country where a populist becomes so powerful because he has the mandate, he has the popular mandate, he has received votes in such a large number that he can say, I am the people, I am the nation. And therefore, all the other institutions, including its own political party, comes second. You know, members of parliament are in parliament because of him, and he's not prime minister because of them. It is the other way around. You have this sequence, this, if you want, unintended consequence that is inherent in populism. So that's something we analyze about the emergency period and the pre-emergency period, showing that the emergency was probably made much easier because of the way Congress had lost its vitality, had lost its network. Even before the emergency, chief ministers were creatures of Delhi. They had been parachuted and they had no local basis. They could not resist. Nobody could resist because everybody was in his or her position because of Mrs. Gandhi. And that's the authoritarian dimension or potential of populism. I think this is an important development that we see today, and in a way, BJP will have a tough time rebuilding its own party cadre, because like Congress, it has been emptied from the inside in a way, all out from the inside. I think this is a parallel that can be interesting for understanding today's India. That's certainly one of the main things. That's one. The second thing, also interesting, is for understanding populism, you need to understand charisma. What is charisma? Why was Mrs. Gandhi so charismatic that she could not only impose her will, but also be elected again in 1980? Less than 3 years after the emergency, after forced sterilization of more than 10 million people, after rehabilitating, quote unquote, millions of people who had been driven out of Delhi and other cities, she wins again. And not only she wins again, but Sanjay Gandhi is a right-hand man, and they both of them seize power again in 1980. What's that? Why that? Why can the populist / authoritarian leader be above accountability? What is the mechanism? What is the psychological mechanism? That's what we also study in the book, and that's what is also relevant for today's India. And I think this is, as I said, related to charisma. And charisma is not something good or bad, or on the contrary, it can be good or bad. You can be a charismatic leader in spite of being a non-virtuous leader. Because charisma, that's what Max Weber, the German sociologist, shows in his study of the charismatic legitimacy. Charisma is something the man who does exceptional things gets. You can do bad things, but they are so exceptional, so unprecedented, that people are mesmerized, fascinated, incapable of considering this person as guilty of anything. Or if they are guilty in such a way that you don't resist, you don't try to resist. And Mrs. Gandhi has done exceptional things in many different ways. First of all, she broke Congress. She was really the strong woman who dared to oppose all these party bosses. Then she broke Pakistan. So she was really the person who, for the first time, waged a war against Pakistan that resulted in the creation of Bangladesh in 1971. Then she also had the first nuclear test. She made India nuclear, in spite of everything, in spite of foreign pressures and so on and so forth. And you could add other smaller developments, including the annexation of Sikkim, for instance. That was the first time, in fact, India conquered a territory, because Goa was her territory. There was no doubt about that. Sikkim was different. So, and she did the emergency. That's also an exceptional achievement. Nobody had done it before. The charismatic leader does things nobody had done before. And you see this repeated somewhat in today's India, because Narendra Modi is equally charismatic for very similar reasons. He's doing things nobody did before.
I think the main takeaway from our book, and this is signaled in its title, is that Indian democracy, like all democracies, is fragile. It is also an idea worth defending, because as the emergency shows us all too clearly, and as our own illiberal moment under Modi shows us, nothing good comes out of autocratic regimes. So there were very few winners during the emergency. A few big businessmen, the upper sections of the middle class, the rural gentry, But the losers, on the other hand, were many, practically everyone else, in fact. So the peasants, the working classes, petty traders, the underclass. And of course, no good can come out of a war on the free press, on universities and the intelligentsia, on trade unions and publicly owned enterprises. So India's first dictatorship, I hope, is a warning for the present. But more than providing a historical parallel with our current regime, what I hope readers will take away from the book is the importance of resisting the powers that be. So one of the reasons why Indira Gandhi was able to impose a dictatorship so effortlessly was that the people in the mid-70s put up very little resistance to her government. So if anything, India's first dictatorship is a call to readers to embrace their agency and defend democracy.
When I taught in Johns Hopkins University with Sunil Kilnani, I discovered that Granville Austin, the man who has written the definitive book on the making of the Indian Constitution, had given his private papers to the university, and in these private papers, you add the transcripts of the hearings of the Shah Commission. And that was a fabulous material, amazingly rich material. So I revisited the emergency in a different perspective, looking not at interviewees, but at archival material. And for me, this is the main lesson in terms of methodology, if you want, that I get from this book. The complementarity between archival work and oral history. Oral history and archival work are very complementary. They really help us to put things in perspective. And I would urge anybody who can to do this brand of mixed methods. We keep saying that the best methods in social sciences today are mixed methods, but we mean something different by that. We mean that you combine the survey-based methods, the statistical methods, and the ethnographic fieldwork-based methodology. Yes, that's one way to proceed. But when you do history, surveys are not available sometimes and not sufficient. Archives can somewhat replace these sources and be combined with the oral history of those who were there before, who had taken part in these events and who remembers. They remember always something interesting to interpret. So yes, that's the takeaway indeed. I would mention from the process of researching, and also for the writing. Secondly, for the writing of the book, it is the first time I co-author a book. I've written half a dozen of books, usually long ones, 500 pages, 600 pages. That's my way to go into details, because the devil is in the detail. And if you want to do justice to big issues like the rise of the plebeians, OBCs, Dalits, the rise of Hindu nationalism, if you don't give details, I think you remain much too superficial. So this time, the book had to be long, even though the period was much shorter. But we shared the burden of writing this book with Pratinav, and it has been a marvelous experience because Pratinav had been my student, but of course, when you co-author a book, you are peers. You are absolutely on a par. There is no way you can prevail. You have to share the views, to examine the same issue from the point of view of the other. And we did not divide the book into chapters written by X or written by Y. Of course, the first draft has to be by one of the two, but the final version has to be agreed on by both authors, because I repeat, this is the work of peers. And this is the beauty of the academia. You know, the academia is one of the few circles where equality is a cardinal value. You know, and that's why even Nobel Prize have brought back seminars in Ivy League universities with PhD students. There is a sense of equality before data, before issues, before research questions, which is sacred. Because you don't prevail, you're not right because you're senior. You're right because you're right. And if you're right, it's because you have done the job. And the job can be done by others. Young students, research assistants, and this is something I cultivate. I co-author op-eds, articles with very young Indian students who sometimes come out of the blue, sending me an email saying, "Here is a topic. What do you think? Let's work on it." And if at the end of the day there is something there, we can go and co-author a piece together. That's really something I had done before, but never for a book. And to do it for a book is giving me ideas. I think I'll do it again. And I do hope that the young generation will benefit from that, and also that they'll get jobs, because the academia is so difficult these days that if it can help them, it's a bonus. But the bonus is for the readers first, because now they have books, at least this one, thanks to this collaboration.